craft into space. But they hoped, with this rover crew journey, that this would soon change. A few weeks before, Onyx and Orion had finished recovering much of the data from the disks and drives that H-124 had picked up at the university under New Atlantic, along with the drives they'd recovered from the various aeronautic facilities where they'd found pieces of the blast deflection craft. One of the monumental tasks before them had been building a rocket that could deliver the blast deflection craft into space. Then they'd lucked out. On one of the disks, they'd found plans for a launch vehicle that could take off from the ground and fly directly into space. No rocket needed. It was the craft designed to replace something called the shuttle program, but the new program hadn't gotten far. One had been built, and then all the funds from the project had been diverted into military spending. The vehicle, named the A-14, had been built and housed in a facility that was a mere 10 feet above sea level on what had then been the East Coast. But as the temperatures had risen due to anthropogenic warming, so too had sea levels risen to disastrous heights, inundating coastal cities and flooding facilities like this one. The vehicle they searched for now might have been more than 200 feet below the waves. Lying there for so many years it felt futile to even hope it was still down there, and still repairable, even if they'd have to salvage parts to rebuild it. But they had to try. They'd been lucky that a group of rovers lived in the area, people Raven had met as a kid when he'd traveled around with his parents, checking on the experimental forests that the rovers had planted, trying to restore some areas to what they'd been before. He'd contacted them, and they'd agreed to help. "What was that thing?" Raven asked the captain, an older, sharply dressed man with a mane of white hair that spilled down his shoulders. In the gloom, his pale face hovered above a thick black woolen turtleneck sweater and black woolen jacket. H-124 didn't know how he wasn't sweating to death. Even his pants were wool, and he wore knee-high boots and a fancy hat with a gold emblem on its brow depicting a porpoise cavorting between two curling waves. "Ancient nuclear AUV, autonomous underwater vehicle," the man said. "A long time ago, they were designed to patrol these waters and disable any enemy ships in the area." "And they think we're an enemy ship?" H-124 asked. He nodded. "Back when they were built, friendlies were tagged with an old identify friend or foe system, so the AUVs knew who was supposed to be there. If you don't have a tag, you're hostile." "And these things are still operational?" Raven asked, his voice wavering. "After all this time?" "They're nuclear-powered, like this sub. They'll go and go until their fuel gives out. This area's full of them, probably put in place to guard this very facility you want to break into." He glanced thoughtfully toward the sonar station. "This place used to be a heavily guarded base, full of top-secret projects in development. They employed hundreds of these AUVs to patrol the water. We've disabled quite a few over the years, but countless others are probably still out there. We've got to be careful, unless we want to end up in a watery grave." "What the hell was that?" came an out-of-breath voice behind them. H-124 turned to see Dirk, framed in the doorway, a collection of wires in one hand and a multi-tool in the other. Perspiration beaded on his sepia skin, soaking into his long purple and black dreadlocks. "Apparently ancient tech that wants us dead," Raven told him. Dirk wiped the sweat off his forehead with his sleeve. "That was a hell of a blow. Tell me there aren't more?" "Lots more, unfortunately," the captain answered. "Captain," said the helmsman, looking at his screen. "We're here." H-124 took a deep breath. It was time to dive. The dive master appeared in the doorway and gestured for them to follow him back to the lockout trunk. It was a chamber where divers entered and water filled to match the outside water pressure. Then the door would open and divers could swim out from there. The dive master had already gone over all the diving equipment, and now she, Raven, and Dirk climbed into the bulky diving suits with full face helmets. Each helmet had been fitted with transducers that converted their voices to ultrasound and receivers that converted those